the one thing that's really challenging about our space right now is, even LeafLink, we're a marketplace, but we're not one marketplace. You can't cross state lines with these products. So we're 27 different marketplaces. Colorado is its own, California is its own. And so for our retail customers, they too have this really hyper regulatory fragmented challenge to scale their businesses.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Peter Davis, managing partner of Interplay Ventures. On this podcast, I interview innovators about their industries, careers, investments, and decisions. Today on the show, I have Ryan Smith. He's an extraordinarily prolific serial entrepreneur. He's been listed by Forbes as 30 under 30, and his current venture, LeafLink, a B2B e-commerce platform for the cannabis industry, is already valued at close to $1 billion. As many of you know, the cannabis industry is on the verge of breakthrough. Prohibition of cannabis is ending in many countries around the world, as it is here in the United States. In this conversation, we're going to discuss the current state of the cannabis industry, what the future will look like, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy the conversation with Ryan. Super interesting. This episode is brought to you by AlphaRoot. AlphaRoot is a tech-enabled commercial and health insurance brokerage specializing in servicing cannabis companies. They support clients from the grow stage to dispensaries and everything in between. And they service some of the most innovative companies in the cannabis world, including LeafLink, the company founded by our guest today. If you're interested in learning more, visit alpharoot.co. Ryan, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, Mark, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. You started a company right out of college. Am I right on that?
Yes. So second semester, senior year, I started a company that was a way for general partners of alternative real estate funds to manage limited partners. And it was similar to like Intralinks or...
Can you put that in English for people who don't know what a limited or general partner is?
So when you buy a building, let's say you have like 50 investors. In the process of those people investing in the company that buys that building, you need to report back to them. You have tax paperwork. You have to send them dividend money. You have to collect money from them. All that is usually done hyper manually, super manual. And so the company that I started was a way of virtualizing that experience. And it was around the time that crowdfunded equity, if you remember this, like 7-8 years ago, that was
Sure.
really exciting. And
Sure.
I thought it was cool to democratize investment through the Jobs Act when that was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the idea, was start this, assemble a lot of limited partners and investors on a network that we can then, use to purchase buildings and go through. It was like a virtualized, it's basically what Cadre is now.
Right.
And they've done a great job with it, but we sold that before, we grew to that size.
How big was the exit?
It was single-digit millions. So there was less than 10 people on it on the team. We'd only raised $300K, and I sold it about 18 months after graduating. So it was definitely
outcome.
Yeah, it was a good outcome. And I left the day after the year. The company that purchased it, it was not a publicly traded REIT. Wasn't really like a place to innovate on the tech side. So I was looking for the next thing.
So as a young guy going A to Z, and now with a few more years under your belt, how do you look back on that experience? What advice do you have for people specifically in that age group who are going on this journey? Are there things that are different from your perspective now or your age group now?
What is the Z? The Z is just like selling something?
Yeah, selling. You completed a process, right? Wasn't a huge outcome, but you built something up and you got out, and you did it in your early 20s. What did you take from that you think folks listening who are 20s starting
I think
could learn?
the way that deal came together was a direct result of my ability to stay close with people that I had been introduced to in the 2 or 3 years before that. And just the stars happened to align in a very fortunate way. There's it's a funny kind of crazy story on how it all came together. But if I hadn't had built a relationship over a few years preceding with the individuals that queued up the meeting of the company that bought it, then that just wouldn't have happened. And I mean, I don't think I'd still be doing that either way today, but I think the main advice would be just like, everyone's so sometimes touchy about ideas, like they're important or they matter, but they're not. I think, people are, everyone's very sensitive and delicate on a lot of things. And I think the reality is You need to like force things. You need to like kick things out into the world and get people who are smarter than you and more experienced to basically like take a crap all over them and let you know what's wrong about it. And I think if you speak to enough people, you start to see patterns that are closer to the reality of where you should probably go. And that's something that I enjoy doing it, but I think that's probably the main advice is talk to more people and actually don't just talk to more people, but like build relationships from those conversations.
So you're talking about keeping in touch with folks. One of the things someone said to me early on was build a strong relationship with your competitors. And that was very counterintuitive to my thinking. The advice I got was that basically the competitors are the people who are most likely to buy your company or to call you to buy them. You know, and I felt there was always a little bit of irony that the people that you usually have the most in common with, people who play the same sport as you or in the same business, are supposed to be your biggest enemies. But, you know, in high school, I had a picture of, you know, the other school that we were trying to beat on the mirror. You know what I mean? Like their logo. And I had more in common with the people on that team than probably anyone else at the school or my school. We were doing the same thing. What's your view on building bridges to competitors, acquirers? How do you think about that specifically?
Uh, I'm I'm all about that. I have regular check-ins with the the best tech founders in the cannabis industry, and actually a few others that I think are interesting verticals, quite similar to us on the B2B marketplace side. And I feel like you learn a lot from it. Demystifies a lot of the paths you can go down in your mind of this company you hear about or know, or some ridiculous article that might go up on TechCrunch or something, and to know the people behind the company, you can learn a lot about them, they you, and just creates a more complete picture of like how the cards lay. Because otherwise, it's I think you're not quite in touch with the reality of what is the competitive scape and or where there are partnerships to be found.
And here's the question everyone's thinking as you say that. What happens if they steal one of your ideas or they do something because you drew attention to it? Can they damage your business?
That's a risk. I think that's part of the reason why like keeping close, like being diligent about and trying to know the people and like do some character judgments before you like completely open up. I think some of these relationships take years. I'm thinking of one example specifically where that has backfired on me. It
Okay.
hasn't yet had a negative impact. I don't think it hasn't had a negative impact on the business, but now I know as a character judgment where those people stand, and then my competitive side comes in, and it's like we could have been partners, now we will dominate you. And that's this is like don't take a nice act. And I think people that knock off a lot of the features we provide and things we do, to me, just like makes a sour taste, and I think something that's very difficult to ever come back from.
Yeah, it does require people to play nice. But I think the industries function best when competitors are competing, but in a productive way. Because if their company starts to go under, they're going to call you to pick up the assets. And
Hmm.
it's a hell of a lot easier to do if you're friends with them.
And our industry is so young as well, the cannabis industry, that
Yeah,
there's not a lot of like what are the assets that we're buying. I think a lot of cases we're buying someone else's problems of a likely failing
r-
operation.
right, right. All right. So next up's LeafLink, correct? In your career?
That's right.
Before we jump into it, when you sold that last company and you set out to do LeafLink, what was something you swore to do differently?
One of my New Year's resolutions for 2015 was I need to find a technical co-founder. I'm not technical. And somehow we created something with consultants and sold it, and couldn't believe that that's how that played out. But I knew that wasn't going to work again. People who know me, like me managing product managers could be a little intense sometimes, and so I needed someone that had that skill set. So I wasn't going to make that mistake again, and that was
Okay.
where I was lucky to find Zach.
Thank you. Yeah, team is big, especially on the technical side. Okay. So mind describing LeafLink for all the listeners, for folks who don't know it?
Yeah, LeafLink is a B2B wholesale marketplace for legal cannabis companies. So we simplify the way licensed retailers, also known as dispensaries, purchase all the things on their shelves, from what we call brands. And well, we can talk about the company, but that's the main connection that we provide to as a B2B marketplace.
Okay, so you're connecting the wholesalers, the people making the product, the people who are ultimately selling it.
Yes.
And it's a web interface. And are you holding any of the inventory, or you're facilitating the transactions online?
We're simply facilitating transactions. We are not, as it's called in the cannabis industry, we're not a plant touching company. So we never take ownership of or participate in the actual transaction. We just help all the people who are, and so that's the main value proposition.
On the outside, I think a lot of people look at this industry and think it's a bunch of stoners who found a business model. I don't think
Yeah.
that's the case. Is that right?
There are definitely companies that line up with that judgment. I think it's becoming less and less true, and that's not, I don't think, a healthy place for. Uh, I mean, that's not a healthy place for the industry to be. I mean, there's things people do in their free time, and that's their free time. And there's things we do and have to be, fully here for at work to be the most valuable partner we can be to our customers. And I mean, I've said I don't think people that are working at, Patron are taking shots at the Monday morning meeting. I actually heard
Right.
that's not, that sometimes that does happen, but that's not what we want to be. I want to bring the
Yeah.
best experience we can to the LeafLink community.
Yeah. And I think it's an insane stigma that people who are acclimating to the change in the marijuana industry, right? No one assumes people working at the beverage industry are drunk during the day, or alcoholics in general, or
Yeah.
fanatics. But
It,
there's a awareness shift that's happening because it's been so taboo for so long.
it's the result of decades of brainwashing, right? I mean, this could be a much longer conversation about all the horrible things that people came to believe about the plant and who smokes it and what they do to society and all that. But I think we're still figuring all that out and retrofitting it to be what is actually closer to reality versus what people's grandparents told them.
Why was it illegal to begin with?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. So first is there was, just on the social level, it was being used by, minority groups they were looking for ways to demonize them and ostracize, and I think that was one of the main like social factors that really pushed making it illegal. There were business components as well. There are some theories around Hearst owning timberland, and it makes a lot more sense to use hemp fiber versus wood fiber to make paper. But he owned all this timberland, and so he was a large proponent of donating to causes that outlawed hemp. And then, as well, starting with cannabis, knowing it would roll over to hemp, there was that. And I think there's also just not a lot of this is still a problem, but not a lot of education on the value of the plant. It wasn't studied thoroughly enough to understand about like medical value and the components of relief that it could bring to patients. So it's all still new and we're figuring out. But I think it was just this like terrible storm of some of like the worst parts of our society coming together to make it illegal.
And this is back in the 20s, right? Am I right about the decade when they made it illegal?
Yeah, I think like 20s, 30s was really when there was a lot of momentum behind making it illegal.
Now, I read somewhere that the two biggest lobbying groups against the legalization of marijuana are, one, the cotton industry, and two, the private jail system.
Wow. Well, the second one is so incredibly dark, and yeah, I mean the first one, cotton's interesting because it echoes. I bet the cotton industry is probably most concerned about like the dynamic of capability of hemp fiber is a direct competitor to cotton.
Will you explain when you say hemp? I think everyone's heard hemp, CBD, cannabis, marijuana. They don't know. I don't know if
Okay.
everyone knows how it all fits together.
Yeah.
I mean, very few people have interacted with any of these plants.
Yep.
Will you explain how hemp is related to marijuana?
Think of hemp as a cannabis as a cousin of a marijuana plant. The difference
Okay.
with hemp is it's typically nearly close to 0% THC. THC is a psychoactive component in a marijuana plant that people typically smoke and, has all these other has benefits and effects. Hemp is usually like 0.00, 1 THC. And so, but just that is enough to kind of lump it all together. And hemp is, for most of human history, like paper as we know it, made from trees, is a last 100 years thing. For the
Huh.
first like 2 or 3,000 years of human history, we were using hemp, and other kinds of like easily to grow fiber to make paper and bags and material and all these things. I mean, hemp can grow anywhere. Obviously, trees could take 5-10 years to be ready to harvest, and so I could understand that on the cotton side.
So it's more cost effective.
Definitely, yeah.
And is it a better product for paper?
There's just not a lot of examples of like hemp paper at mass production to know. The ones I've seen are pretty artisan looking. They don't look like the paper we put in our printers.
Right.
But doesn't mean we can't get there. I mean, if we could get hard wood fiber to become paper, you're tapping into my eco-campus stuff. If we can make that paper, I'm sure we could, make hemp of equal quality. But it's not a lot of companies doing that.
And it's more ecologically friendly than cutting down trees because of the way the plants grow.
Yeah, and there's probably elements too of you can grow hemp almost anywhere. I bet cotton is in certain geographic zones, and you got to ship it, and it's just way more complex.
So the narrative I'm hearing is way back in the day, there was a big political move where people who owned the paper supply chain or the wood supply chain lobbied, used some racial leverage, and got a drug outlawed so that they could dominate an industry. That's what I'm piecing together. Is that the narrative, or is that?
I've heard 3 or 4 different theories. I'm kind of stitching all together as best I've kind of bought into them. But
fascinating.
I think it's like social and business components coming together and pretending to be partners in just this really negative way to make a plant that grows naturally illegal.
That's amazing. Okay, so when you look at this space, just transitioning over the business side of things, it's so exciting. It's the Wild West. This is the end of prohibition for a product that, I don't know what percentage of Americans already smoke it, right? Just like in prohibition, everyone was already drinking.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a law that in some ways is unnatural because it's not being enforced, right?
Yep.
Where is the money being made? There's a whole supply chain here. I don't want to go through each of the segments. Like when this all settles out, which segment is going to be the profit center or the big place to be, or is it all of them? So first of all, the agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
So the growers in this space, is that a long-term? I mean, usually when I think farming, I think low margin, right? And right now we're at the beginning of something where people are excited about it. They're maybe paying more. There's shortages.
That's all right.
At scale, is farming?
Yes.
Okay. So all the things we think about with a normal pattern on that,
and
right, we expect to normalize.
We've seen a similar progression. So when states go legal, what normally happens is you can have a great business just growing crops, harvesting them, and selling them. That ages out pretty quickly as this market becomes more competitive. And so our bet is that the place of the largest profit center, ultimately, if you're a plant touching company, is in brand ownership. That's where margin is created.
So I want to jump into that. So let's talk about. So when I think about the margin in alcohol, I'm not an alcohol expert, but wheat, barley, whatever that is, that doesn't sound like that's where the margin is. It
Probably
sounds like
not.
it's an AB
selling
InBev.
Tonnage. Yeah.
Yeah, it's AB InBev, right? It's buying Budweiser. If I was going to buy a stock, that's where I'd be buying.
Yeah.
So the brand is the place here. That's where
that's what we think.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to decipher. I mean, right now, because of the regulations, there are a lot of companies that will one day become house of brands. But today, they do own retail, they do own logistics, they do own production because they can. But I think the long-term game is knowing the future, assuming this is like every other industry or most other industries, that's where they're likely many of them gearing towards. These are a lot of like the multi-state operators or publicly traded companies.
Now, what I've heard is that, people think about marijuana, their initial reaction is that it displaces cigarettes because it's a smoking behavior. I've heard when people have looked at the actual economics of it, when people choose to smoke marijuana, their consumption of alcohol goes down because it's a recreational behavior. It's what am I doing on Friday night? And it's this versus that. Do you see the alcohol players getting into this space yet? Is it going to be Budweiser and then marijuana brands and under the same umbrella? You think they're going to be separate companies? Is there anything legally preventing that? How is this going to evolve?
I understand that thinking, or it's like smoke must equal smoke. I think the use case of how they're of the actual product is more important. And I think the difference that you're saying here is cannabis is an experiential product, right? Like when you use certain products, it changes your reality a little bit, and it's a path you can go down, which is similar to liquor.
Right.
When you smoke a cigarette, you're not really there's no experience there. The experience is you're killing yourself a little bit, right? Like you're not there's no
It's a physical habit. It's
yeah,
less the intoxication of it.
and I think as a result, I don't think that cigarette companies. I think they probably are more interested in it less because of the smoking use case, more around that they have a full supply chain to cater to a harvestable crop that has to be dried out. Similar things to the tobacco higher up in the supply chain. But the companies that I think have been most historically the last 5 years, let's say, focused on this space, they've already deployed billions of dollars. I mean, Constellation made a $4 billion investment north of the border in Canada in Canopy Growth.
It's
And that's
already
like,
happening.
yeah, it's already happening. Every single one of them has either JVs or subsidiaries or has made investments on the liquor side in the cannabis space. Because if you think about the whole craft beer movement has leveled. And so for them, they're just at this peak point. And unless they create something totally new, and there'll be a brand here or there that they buy for a couple $1 billion that might be interesting for a hot second, but it's not a whole new category. And this is.
Got it. Very interesting. So, and where does retail fit into this? Because I know that, states are coming online. New Jersey just passed legalized marijuana. I live in New Jersey. There is a lot of excitement for people who are trying to get the licenses.
Yep.
And I look at that and I think you're probably going to make a lot of money out the gate, but isn't, a retail store going to become a retail store when there's a lot of them? Is it going to, is it going to normalize the way agriculture is going to normalize, where you're buying into a brick and mortar, typical margin
I think the
business?
whole supply chain will mimic elements of others. I mean, retail is retail. You might be on the higher end of a per square foot sales capacity in this industry versus something else, but I don't think it's not gonna be anything, moonshot exciting ultimately as retail. Um, Unless it's done, at scale, right? But I
Right.
think, if some friends are looking for licenses to own a shop locally, it's probably going to become something similar to owning a piece of a local restaurant, right? It's something to
Right.
say, an
It's going to
experience,
be a
but
bar,
yeah,
a convenience store.
yeah.
But what are we seeing people build chains? Is that happening yet? Because like you're saying, the scale, the quality, the customer service. I mean, there are people who have brick and mortar footprints that obviously have big businesses,
Hmm.
right?
There,
McDonald's, right?
yeah,
There's a
there,
big business.
there's and there that will exist. I think that the one thing that's really challenging about our space right now is, even LeafLink, we're a marketplace, but we're not one marketplace. You can't cross state lines with these products. So we're 27 different marketplaces. Colorado's is its own, California is its own. And so for our retail customers, they too have this really hyper regulatory fragmented challenge to scale their businesses. That if they
Mm,
wanted to be open up in Michigan and they're in California, they have residency requirements. There's a whole long process to get the license. It's going to be hyper competitive. In some states, it could be a few $1 million for a license, depending on how many licenses are available. And so there are chains that exist. They probably begin capping out around 12 or 15 shops. They tend to be pretty regionally focused. That will change in time, I'm sure. But right now, the industry is like super fragmented, and there's certainly no McDonald's equivalent.
So I didn't realize that people in Colorado cannot buy product from California.
That's right. Businesses in Colorado
Businesses in
can't buy, but if
Colorado.
you're living in Colorado, you go to California, you could go to a shop.
Right. But I mean, on the business side, the B2B,
You
in
cannot.
this supply chain, the agricultural supply, every state is building their own top to bottom vertically integrated supply chain.
It's not all vertically integrated, but it's all within state boundaries. Yeah.
Fascinating. So when Jersey turns on, they have to not just, do the stores, they have to get farms up and running, warehousing, distribution, logistics.
Manufacturing. Yeah.
So
Incredibly inefficient.
what is preventing the crossing state lines? Is the federal legal paradigm?
Yeah. I think there's some cracks forming in this concept, but the general theme is it's still federally illegal. And unless it's interstate commerce, you're not violating federal law. and the federal government would have to then come into your state where you are following the rules, and then it becomes a state versus federal
I see.
case. And so
So
that's
even
the
if you went
protection.
state to state, if you had two states next to each other, North and South Dakota, it's legal in both places. You can't drive across the line because then it's a federal
Yes.
suit. Right?
Yep.
You have to deal with the unknown of
Everyone's
fascinating.
kind of living in the bubbles of their states being legal, and they don't want to really go beyond that right now.
When do you think the federal government is going to make a move? What do people in the industry think about this? I mean, how many states? Can you give us an update? How many states are legal now?
There are 15 legal states,
Okay.
over 30, I think over 35, definitely over 30 medical in some form or fashion states. And yeah, sorry.
If they go medical, is it 3 years after medical, they're always legal? Is there a pattern here?
It used to be that way, but now that it was that way in the beginning, like the first, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 states. But now you're not a pioneer if you decide to, become a legal state. So why not just jump it and collect the tax revenue of these higher margin products?
Right. So we don't, for the 15 or so states that are not legal for recreational use, but are legal for medical, we don't know that they're going to make the leap.
A lot of those states are like southern, generally more conservative states. And they, you need to be dying of some serious diseases to get access to it, but you can. So there might be some areas where it never makes it completely.
I see. Is this a red state, blue state national issue? I didn't realize that.
I think it's actually the only thing most Americans agree about.
Okay, interesting. So why is this not legal on the federal level?
Well, assuming
happening?
Assuming DC could function generally on issues even more important than those affecting our industry.
That is a massive assumption at this point.
Yeah, I think there hasn't been anything. I mean, when Jeff Sessions was Attorney General, the industry was very concerned. I mean, he rescinded the Cole memo and a couple of things that the industry held really dear, but there was really no action beyond that. And I think their inaction caused states to have to take the initiative to be progressive. And so as a result now, I think the federal government is playing this catch-up game, which as a result of the elections, I mean, if you're in the cannabis industry, you couldn't have been happier with the way every state that had it on the ballot, blue or red, affirmed it, like medical or recreational. That's awesome. Obviously, Biden administration coming in a few days, they've messaged some really strong things around at least decriminalizing. And then there's a couple of acts, or there's a couple of pieces of legislation that are on hold right now that would, legalize certain elements of the financial industry for the space. And that would be, I think, huge. And so those are things are, very much cooking.
Right. I assume at this point, most of the leadership of most of the major companies in this space. Is that right?
Yeah, we stay close with all of our clients, and yeah, definitely
public companies. There's a lot of money in this. Is there a proper lobby happening? Why is this? This seems like this is the kind of thing that an industry would put their head down and drive change, especially if there's public support.
A few factors in there. So first is there are industry groups, like we're members of the NCIA, and we used to go to DC and have these days with congressmen and senators to talk about what's great about the space. I think the challenge is everyone wants legalization, but everyone also knows that once legalization happens, particularly for, I'd say, brands, once legalization happens, Constellation, Diageo, AB InBev, Southern Wine, everyone's coming in. And so there's this thing that we will get that we want. But if it takes, I think some companies might say, if it takes another year, that's one more year that I can build out my organization, grow my brand. We obviously want all these things. There's a lot of tax impact things that are also really important we could talk about. But there's industry groups making efforts. Everyone wants legalization. But I think the fact that it's taken its time over the last 4 years, I think people will look back, like the effect of the current administration on the industry. It didn't approve the space or allow it to, go federally legal, but it did give a huge opportunity to a lot of companies to get their legs beneath them before, like if it had gone federally legal 4 years ago, all the companies I mentioned would be very much here, and we'd feel that. That's not the case yet.
But we have a sophisticated private equity market now. So even if the large brands aren't rolling up the market, the PE guys and gals are going to go out and do that.
And that's happening.
They're going to buy everyone up. But I guess if you give everyone a year or two more, they'll get paid more at the acquisition point. So, but eventually, America consolidates. That's what it does. That's what the market forces drive.
Yeah, the thing we need to be careful of in our space is there's elements around how the liquor space came to be that just ended up hyper consolidated across two or three companies. We want to really avoid that for the cannabis industry, but consolidation is like a natural, to your point, thing that happens as spaces mature.
So if you were to write some policy when this becomes federally legal, why would you add in that we don't see in other industries?
I think one of the main things we want to avoid is a forced three-tier distribution system, which is what exists in liquor. Basically, what that means is a brand can't also be a distributor, and a brand can't sell directly to a retailer unless through a distributor. And I think that forcing of actors in certain parts of the supply chain can can go too much in a certain direction that actually ends up landing on the thing you were trying to avoid in the first place. And so when we're writing up some of these regulations, I think it's really important to consider like companies naturally, organically want to specialize. Why don't you be the best distributor you could be? Why don't you be the most amazing brand or like the most incredible retailer? Let people do a great job of those things, but don't force them to have to do others or own everything else for the margins to make sense. And so I think that's some of the it's really complicated, but I think those are some of like the general themes we should be working into the rules.
So the key you're saying is in the alcohol system, the brands cannot be the distributors and the distributors cannot be the retailers, right?
That's right.
So you're saying that that creates a problem.
Because and the brands can't jump over the distributor, talk to the retailer. And so what that means is then you have these distributors that are the gatekeepers of the whole supply chain,
They own the monopoly, right?
and then that becomes a monopoly. Yeah.
Got it. So I want to shift gears for 1 second. CBD,
hmm
it's in everything. I don't get it. I don't get it. I've tried it in oils and otherwise. I haven't felt the impact. Is it scientifically proven to do something? Is it snake oil? Is CBD going to survive in this industry? What is? And I know there's a lot of people who feel really strongly, and they're going to be mad that I just said what I just said, but I don't get it. Can you illuminate? Do you think this is part of the future of the cannabis industry, or do you think it's a little bit of a hype
Well,
along the way?
where did you buy? I mean, so I think there is a lot of CBD. There's a lot of things labeled as CBD because there's no regulation around it.
Right, and there's
That
mouth sprays, and they taste terrible.
which is and
Right?
so that is actually that's probably the equivalent of snake oil because it's not actually CBD, and that is
Okay.
so prolific because there was a lot of hype that you probably got exposure to something that was just garbage. Forget about
Okay.
CBD; it's just the people that created it weren't actually putting. It's not actually
Right.
CBD.
Right.
There's definitely research around regulated. So like for example, CBD companies, we work with them if they have a THC license in the states that they operate in because that means they have to follow certain regulations and rules to make sure it is actually what they say it is. If you went to a local deli over here in New York or in Jersey and you buy CBD, it's probably crap. It's probably not going to have any.
You can
Yeah.
use foul language. That's okay.
But there is research around like some of the it's not psychoactive, but some of the relaxing
Okay.
benefits of
So you think
CBD.
there's a future for this because there's CBD infused everything now.
I think there was a bit of a
And
fad for sure. Yeah.
it's a fad, right?
Well, it has a place. It doesn't need to be in every single thing. It'll be in a lot of things, but
What do you think
yeah.
it'll stick in? Where does this last? What's going to have longevity in the CBD industry?
I think in pain relief and creams and things that people like can topically apply, especially for like older people. I think
Okay.
I think that's like because they
I
usually
think
have
that's real.
concerns about THC. This is not
Yeah.
psychoactive. They obviously have pain. I think that's one category that'll be there's legs there.
Okay. Big question. Thank you for that, by the way, because I've been dying to ask you that question.
Okay.
What does the cannabis industry need now? How can the people who are listening, who are would-be entrepreneurs, existing entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs between ventures, how can they help?
You called the industry Wild West, and it still is. I think we're evolving really quickly though to become this more mature, steady state of a really tech first industry. I think what the industry really needs is people listening to this that are not in cannabis, or weren't in cannabis before it was legal to enter the space. I think like incredible professional, excellent operators. And the cool thing about the space is if you're an accountant or an HR person or a salesperson or a lawyer, there's all those jobs exist in the cannabis industry, and it needs that level of it needs more incredible talent to come in. 95% of people we hire at our company probably wouldn't be at in the cannabis industry if they weren't at LeafLink. And I think that's what we need to perpetuate. It's like more great people to continue leveling up the industry, to be polished. That's the best experience for patients end of day, and brands and customers and retailers and tech providers. So that's what the industry really needs.
Ryan, you have accomplished a hell of a lot in the first 30 years of your life.
Thanks.
You've got a big path ahead of you with this company, but I have a feeling it's not going to be your last. Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
There's something we're building on the B2B marketplace that is incredibly special in the cannabis industry because the industry is still learning itself. We say we're defining, not really disrupting anything because there wasn't much here before. There is a ton of opportunity to bring the things that we're creating on the B2B side to other legacy verticals. I think it's a much heavier lift. That's definitely things to disrupt, but there are industries that could be so much more efficient if they existed on the foundation of a B2B marketplace like LeafLink, where we're helping a third of all legal wholesale cannabis now goes through our marketplace. I don't know that 100% of what we've built is applicable to the coffee industry, but I think probably 70% of it could make sense. So 10 years from now, I don't know if it's us doing it or we're partnering with people who do want to do it, or we're just a model that people are looking to emulate in other industries. But I think that's what's exciting to me about where we're defining this space. And instead of it being the Wild West, I want some legacy industry to say, you know who we want to be like in 5 or 10 years? We want to be just like the cannabis industry. It's tech first. It exists in this super efficient model, and it sits on the B2B marketplace. And that marketplace is LeafLink.
Well, hopefully an entrepreneur listening to this starts that company, and then after you go public, you buy them.
That could be what we're talking about in 10 years.
That could be what your way in. All right. So you've had a lot of experience in a very short period of time. You've accomplished amazing things. What is the most important thing you've learned as an entrepreneur? Please help the people listening.
Thanks for all your compliments, by the way, but I do very much I get a little bit like, that's great, but there's way more to do. And so there's very much just getting started, feeling when I hear that.
You got the fight.
Thanks. The most interesting thing that I've learned from the business, that was the question?
Yeah.
The companies grow faster than people, for sure. I'm sure you've seen this with your portfolio companies, and no matter what stage you're at, there's always this I think race personally, but also for all the people that we bring on that we build with to grow faster than the company, which is incredibly challenging. And so often, we're looking for people that we bring on that might feel, they're a couple of years too experienced for a role, but then a year will pass and it's we need what's the next level, and I think continuing to find just amazing people and providing support to individuals to help grow and some people can be dynamic and they can actually grow fast in the company. It's rare, but it's a thing. And if that doesn't exist, make sure we're continuing to bring in and welcome new people to the company to keep growing that quickly. It's probably it seems like a never ending challenge because there's obviously always another level. And we do tend to even build greater speed. So the challenge becomes sometimes more intense along the way. It's an exciting but unpermanently solvable problem.
Is there a breaking point or a rule of thumb you found where after you scale a certain amount, things start to break again, or is it a continuum?
I think when we hit 40 or 50 people, we really felt pain because then it wasn't really it wasn't the 20 of us. Then everyone worked so closely with each other as much, and I think we felt it again. Honestly, when we hit around 120.
Okay.
It's almost every 40 or 50 people, there's this, because it just, the structure then needs to change. And all of a sudden you need middle management and we're allowing people to be managers who weren't managers before. Can they handle that? Do we need to support them? Should we bring in more people that they can learn from? I think those were clear break points.
How big's the team now?
140 people.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey, thank you for your time. Thanks for being on this.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Big thanks to Ryan for being on the podcast today. It's going to be super interesting to see what happens with cannabis as it becomes legalized. If you like what you heard, please hook us up with a like or a 5-star review, and feel free to share with a friend. You can find me on Twitter at MPD. And to hear more of my conversations with innovators, subscribe on YouTube, Facebook, or any other major podcast platform. Just search for Innovation with Mark Peter Davis.